All right. Hi, George. Welcome to the Northeastern Next podcast. Really excited to have you today.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here and chatting with you.
Yeah, where am I talking to you from?
Well, I'm in Houston, Texas right now. I live just on the outskirts of the city. I was born and raised before I went and made my trip in '97 up to Boston to go to school at NU.
That's awesome. Yeah, I actually did want to talk to you about just how did you find NU from Texas? I saw that on your website. You're a fifth generation Texan. That's
Yes,
awesome.
sir. Yeah, thank you. I was looking at a few different things. Soccer was one of them.
Mhm.
I knew that there was a really strong tie with the co-op experience. There was a lot of people I know that went into political science, and they had some internships and work that was in the White House. And at the time, I was really wanting to get into politics, and so that was kind of on my short list. And I sent out a bunch of videos to the different colleges that I was looking at for soccer, and I got invited to try out to NU, and that was kind of the place. Once I went there and found the city and just fell in love with it, I decided that that was where I was going to call home for the next 4 or 5 years.
That's awesome. So, can you tell me a little bit about your Northeastern experience general? It sounds like soccer was a big part of it and the co-op experience too. I'd love to hear about just your time at Northeastern.
Absolutely. Well, I started in '97. I played for my first year at soccer there, and then the second year I ended up playing for a little while, and then I ended up leaving. It's just a lot of work, and I was not. I kind of made it as a field player. I had tried out as a goalkeeper. My roommate Alan Lewis was the Canadian national team keeper, and it was very hard to go up against one of the best in the in the business. So I made it as a field player, and I just wasn't playing as much as some of the other guys. Didn't have quite that skill set that they did, and so I ended up kind of going and playing in the club level at NU there, and had a lot of fun. I started out, like I said, in '97. I was thinking about getting into political science, moved into English with a minor in secondary education. And I ended up getting, was a part of the honors program. So at the time, you could get some extra courses for free if you were in the honors program. And that was something that I really wanted to utilize, help, save some money on that side. And I ended up not doing the co-op program. I think I'm the only person at the of any of my group of friends that did not. Looking back on it, I really wish I did, because I had so many friends that benefited from it. But I just kind of went and churned through. So I kind of finished in about 3.5 years. But a lot of people will finish in the five, and I just kind of ground that through and took sometimes 5, 6 courses at a time, and just kind of, at the time, I was also working at Northeastern at the athletics complex, Parsons Field. And I was also doing some volunteer work with some children with autism. I was also putting on local events with a bunch of different friends of mine who are musicians. I was in a couple bands, and I'd kind of host these things called local artists doing their thing. I was also in the student government at the time. I was the president of the English club. Yes, there was an English club, and hopefully there still is one, but I put on some events, and that was kind of a jumping point to my next level of what work I was doing, which was traveling around the world, interviewing Indigenous elders, putting together their life stories and messages with a guy named Harvey Arden, who came and spoke at the Northeastern event I had in December of 2000. And then that kind of was the beginning of the next path of my next, well, 2 years working immediately with him. But then up until he passed away in 2018, we worked, put together books, published, and live events, just all sorts of stuff. But it all kind of centered around my time and energy at NU.
That's awesome. Yeah, I actually do want to explore that topic with you a little bit because I see from your website that you reached out to Harvey while you were throwing an event for. Can you remind me what the event was again at Northeastern?
Yeah, it
Because
was.
Mhm,
It was called. It was raising awareness for Leonard Peltier. He was a Native
mhm.
American political prisoner. Millions of people believe that he was wrongfully incarcerated, and so I was kind of putting together some awareness of his case and a lot of the things that had happened with the American Indian movement back in the '70s. And I had a lot of encouragement from Northeastern staff for me to go ahead and work on that event. I ended up getting some grants and some requests for funding from the school, and yeah, it was called In Pursuit of Justice was the name of the event. And we had a bunch of different people come in, had an indigenous band come in and play, a lot of different speakers, friends of Leonard's, as well as some original artwork. And Harvey was a National Geographic staff writer for 23 years. He was a best-selling author. And I had reached out to him, asked him if he wanted to be one of the speakers at the event. He immediately wrote back and said, "Yes, absolutely, I'll be there." And we had an honorarium for him, and he's like, "No, donate that to Leonard." And I just want to come. And he showed up that morning of the event, and we were almost late to the event because we ended up talking the entire time. This guy was just fascinating. He was right next to Anwar Sadat when he was assassinated. I mean, bullets flying by him, the Egyptian president. He was in 1981, I believe it was, the Andes earthquake that killed like 100,000 people. He was right in the middle of this. He had been at a pinnacle of all these really historical events, and I was just picking his brain. And after that, he we just kind of had a kindred relationship, and he said, why don't you come work with me? Let's go travel around and record some people's messages and their histories and their stories, and let's see what we can do about that. And that kind of spawned the beginning of my interviewing and, multimedia work that I've continued to up until today.
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, I'm curious how you were able to bring that relationship with Harvey, excuse me, the relationship with Harvey to the next level. How were you able to develop it from an undergraduate student who reached out and asked him to speak at an event to eventually doing what we can get more into, starting the publishing company with him and pursuing the stories of Indigenous elders. Be curious to hear how you were able to develop that relationship.
Absolutely. Well, when he first showed up, like I said, we hit it off really well. And then he said, let's keep in touch. And he was asking me what I was going to be doing after graduation. I had done my student teaching in the inner city of Boston. And while I liked it, I realized that wasn't necessarily something I wanted to do right away. And that, having the teaching certificate in my pocket would be good, but I kind of wanted to see what maybe that next journey in life may be. And, he asked me if I was interested in joining this company called Dream Keepers, where it was called Bringing the World to the Elders and the Elders to the World. And it was really the first stage kind of, he called it living books. It'd be kind of like the very first stage of ebooks. We'd have a website and people would go ahead and they'd I think it was like $50 a year for a subscription. And then all of our books, all of our videos would be available for them to check out there. And so it'd be like a website of maybe like Chief Orville Looking Horse. And then you'd go to that page and you'd read his book, White Buffalo Teachings. And then you'd see a live event that we did at like Harvard or wherever it may be. We did a lot of stuff around New England. And then it became where we'd travel around and basically have these events where we'd raise awareness live. We did, I think, one of the very first webcasts at Harvard
Wow.
back then. And then we would kind of go off to the reservation in South Dakota or New Mexico or upstate in Seneca land up in New York. And we would sit down and work with these elders and put together maybe videos, documentaries, trying to preserve their, words, thoughts, messages, history for future generations in that new digital form, especially in an oratory community to try to then be able to have these capsules of information that they could share and that they could hold on to, but that we could also share with a greater audience. Kind of, we called it being a bridge keeper between two different cultures.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's incredibly important to be able to archive those kind of events and those stories. So, thank you for just the greater humanity for doing that. That's amazing.
Cheers.
When,
Thank you.
of course, when you were traveling, I am curious, when you would travel to, New Mexico or when going out west to these reservations and everything, and you were talking to these elders, did you have a specific story in mind that you were pursuing, or were you going to just arrive on the reservation and sort of build the story after hearing what you had heard from the elders?
That's a very good question. A lot of times it would be kind of open-ended. One of the
Mhm.
things that Harvey used to do is he would sit down at the foot of these elders, and he was doing this 40 years before I ever joined him, right? He was of Jewish descent and had a lot of family in the Holocaust. And then when he came over and started doing a bunch of work in journalism, he felt very closely related to the story and the struggles of Native Americans and the American Holocaust, if you will. And so that was something he would go and talk to these elders, and he would just sometimes say, would you like to share some wisdom? What was it that you would like to tell us?
Mhm.
And instead of having his own idea of how to spin a story, he would just kind of let them tell whatever it is that they felt was important, and then that would be the story. And so his authentic voice of being kind of a conduit to theirs was something that I think allowed him to walk into a lot of these rooms with open arms. And it wouldn't be like, oh, here's a reporter going to go ahead and give his spin. They were like, hey, this guy's like a journalist and he wants to be a historian and he wants to be a caretaker of our stories. And so whenever I started working with him, I think I kind of got, it was like almost like a reciprocation of that, where they would say, you're with Harvey. We kind of let you in. We trust you. And I would just try to be as careful of a caretaker of that of their stories and messages, just like he would. So a lot of times it wouldn't be an agenda behind it. It would be like, how can we help you? What is it that you want to share with the world? And, how can we help preserve this in any way? Who should we talk to next? And so a lot of times they called it like a travels in a stone canoe. You put the stone canoe in the river and it would just kind of take you wherever you went. There was a book of the same name that he had. And so I kind of felt like we were on that kind of journey where we never knew where we're going next, but we always were found the way at the end of talking to someone. They'd say, "Hey, go over here and talk to them." And that was kind of how was our blueprint for a little while of how we got around and interviewing people.
That's really cool. I was wondering how that worked, and it sounds like a central theme to each and every one of these stories too, is that you are just amplifying these voices and, really giving them a spotlight that maybe they wouldn't necessarily have maintained before that. That being said, do you have any stories that stuck out to you more than others?
I went out there was it was a gathering in New York City
Mhm.
with Chief Orville Looking Horse. He's the 19th generation keeper of the sacred white buffalo calf pipe. He wrote a book called White Buffalo Teachings, which talks about the sacred rites and rituals of the Lakota, Nakota, Dakota people. And this sacred calf pipe had been passed around through 19 generations through their people, and he's the caretaker of it. So he's a kind of he is a chief of the Lakota people, but he was going around and talking about a lot of the things that were going on in the world at the time and how he really felt like there was a lot of healing. He'd do a thing called World Peace and Prayer Day on June 21st, the summer solstice every year. We'd go and pray on sacred sites, regardless of your background, creed, religion. It would just be going and honoring these sacred places around the world and trying to gather people up and to pray for them. And so he did this event, and then he ended up coming through, I believe, in August that year to the United Nations building, and they had this special event that was supposed to be outside. There had been a prophecy that there would one day be a pipe ceremony, a Chanupa ceremony, the sacred pipe, inside the building of all nations. And he had had this vision when he was younger. Well, it ended up just happened to be there was 100 and something degrees, and so they moved the ceremony from outside the UN to inside the UN, which was everyone who was there was very excited about this. And I just didn't understand why until someone told me about this prophecy that was basically being fulfilled that day, and to be a witness in that. And then I went and joined him in a sweat lodge and an EP ceremony, and he asked me to sit right by him. And people later on were like, "Hey, how did you know this guy? How long have you been working with him?" I said, "I just kind of met him a few days ago." And they're like, "For you to be next to him is a very, very sacred thing, and it's a very special honor." And I didn't really realize it at the point too, but then being with him, going and staying at the house of the founders of the American Indian movement, Dennis Banks worked with Russell Means, Clyde Bellecourt, all these people who were these very important leaders. I ended up having friendships with them. And so those friendships, those experiences, I never thought that those would be possible, but they ended up being all through, being a vehicle of just trying to, capture and share and, be a conduit to all these wonderful informations and stories. So yeah, there's, going and having a sweat lodge with the founders of the American Indian movement, walking outside and seeing the Northern Lights for the first time, and like being like, how is it that I'm here? Like, what,
Wow.
what did I do to get here? And I think it's a lot of it just kind of staying on the path and honoring being there, and just being in the right spirit kind of allowed me to have experiences that, that you couldn't pay for those types of things. They were just amazing and very, fulfilling in many different ways.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine how fulfilling and how just incredible and like almost out of body an experience like that must feel. Are these stories published and like archived under HYT Publishing? Can somebody go out there and find these?
Yeah, good question. I've had some of them over at haveyouthought.com at the publishing company. After Harvey and I, well, when he passed, that was the end of our work together. And I made a website to kind of honor him, harveyarden.com.
Mm.
And so there's a few of those stories there that I've shared. I've done some of this stuff on my socials before, just kind of talking about these experiences that I just mentioned there, like with the American Indian Movement founders. And, I'm slowly but surely, I've been writing them with the goal of putting out a book or an ebook. Um, Something that I can share about these experiences, because, you know, most of those times when I tell people about them, they'd be like, it's hard to like fathom all these places that I went with Harvey and the things that happened, and some of these things were like witnessing little miracles, to be able to talk about those. And I definitely wrote them down as I was going through them because I didn't want to forget them. So there's a compilation, and I'd say maybe in the next couple of years, I want to put something out with that. I've got another book that's kind of in the forefront, that I'm going to do, and then I'll kind of jump into a little bit more about my history.
Okay, that's awesome. Yeah, that's something that I think everybody's going to be looking forward to because I know I'm going to go and start reading them on Have You Thought dot is it .org or .com?
.com. Mm-hmm. Have you
.com.
thought .com? Yep.
Yeah, I'm absolutely going to go and read some of them because that just they sound incredible, like truly once in a lifetime experiences. Um, Now I do want to transition a little bit, and I'm curious. I want to hear a little bit about Blitch Associates too, the financial advising company that you have with your father. What was the inspiration for starting that?
Well, so my dad he started he was a financial advisor, right out of college. And basically, he is just a wizard with math, a true genius. He didn't pass everything out genetically that he has, but I'll take what I can get. But he is just a wizard with numbers. And so he has been a leading financial advisor in the state of Texas for a long time, working with a lot of small cities, towns, municipalities. And there was a point in time I was working with a marketing firm. I used to make television, radio commercials, graphic design, website design, logo design, all that kind of stuff. And then I left that company when they kind of took a turn in a direction I wasn't really agreeing with. And I went to actually, when I went to the visit with the Lakota people, back in 2004, I think it was. And I had taken my 2 weeks, went out there, and I came back and trained my replacement in the job. And then my mom was like, "Hey, if you ever want to work in finance, your dad would love to have you with him." I said, "Huh, I never really thought about that. I mean, decent with numbers, but that wasn't necessarily a path that I ever had." And
Mhm.
so we talked, and he was at the point where he's about to start having to turn down some business. And if in that kind of in the industry, if you turn away business, they might not call you for the next one. And so he invited me to join him, and I did a 6 month trial, because at the time I was also touring around the country with my band, and so I was still pursuing that as kind of a career, and or at least part-time career. And then I'd come back in and kind of work, 4 or 5 days a week, and then travel on the weekends or take a couple weeks off to tour, whatever it may be. And so yeah, that trial, I think I'm on year 20 now. So far it's been a good little trial run. I think it's going to work out. And it's been amazing. I get to work with my father every day, which is just a blessing. He's literally the kind of top dog as far as, in this industry, and I just learned so much from him. And it's something that I've really enjoyed. That job also, there's times it allows me to work on my other things, whether it's my company, Map My Ranch, or the publishing company, or my podcast. So it's been something that, I'm able to continue to, further my own pursuits that I have interests in, as well as having something that, allows me to keep my family in a very good and comfortable space. So it's just a blessing all around. But yeah,
Yeah.
he's an amazing man. And it's just been so much fun to be able to work with him side by side every day for almost 20 years now.
Wow, that's incredible. And I'm congratulations to you for that. That sounds like you said, that's a good trial run. But even then, it sounds like you kind of have the best of both worlds going with that. My question, excuse me. My question for you now is like it's very obvious that you have an entrepreneurial spirit to you. And I know you just mentioned Map My Ranch. I would be very interested in hearing a little bit about it. What was the inspiration behind Map My Ranch? What's the process of starting a business with a friend? It's a very, very cool. It sounds like a very cool business and a very cool business model. And obviously, being in Boston, I'm not necessarily going to be the most familiar with it. So, I'd love to hear about it.
Sure thing. Well, it kind of started out. I have two ranches in my family. One on my mother's side, it's been around for 5 generations in South Texas. Another one that my grandfather and my father bought in 1975 in Central Texas. So growing up, it's what I knew, just being around the ranch, whether it was, kind of ranching, farming, or if it was hunting, or just kind of taking pictures and video of wildlife. And so it was something that, or looking for arrowheads, as you guys can't see it as you're listening, but there's a bunch of arrowheads behind me. And so that was been my favorite thing to do, is walk around the land and just kind of, connect with it. And so one of the days, one of my buddies, Colin Williams, one of my best friends, he was a GIS analyst, a GPS, expert really in all things mapping. And he got a really high-end GPS unit, He brought it out to the ranch, and we were going around and marking different spots and basically creating a custom map of the property. So we're going to overlay it onto some aerial imagery, show the boundaries, and show different spots where, maybe it's an overlook or maybe a game trail or whatever it may be. And so we put that together and made this hard copy printed map. And we showed it to a few friends. And the first 4 or 5 people, when they saw it, they said, "Hey, you should map my ranch. Hey, you should map my ranch." And so Colin and I were like, "Hey, maybe we can do a little company called Map My Ranch." And it started out in Texas where we were making maps for people's hunting properties. And it's since expanded. We've worked with people in, all 50 states, multiple different countries, and we do maps for really anything, whether it's commercial, farming, if there's people who go on hikes, if you want to get something for a state park or a national park. We do stuff for, people who are fishing, whether it's their favorite lake or maybe it's coastal property, maybe it's, just a place they have on a beach and they just want to have, an overlook of that area. So we have contracts with a bunch of companies that have really good aerial imagery. We got some flight teams we work with. And so whatever it may be, we did vineyards in California. So if they want to have an aerial image of what they have, and then maybe we'll customize it, say, "Hey, these are the grapes that are growing here," or, "Hey, this land is public land. This land is, government BIA land if they're hunting out in West and stuff." So whatever it may be, we can go ahead and customize that for you. So we have like two different types of maps. One that just shows the boundary of the property or, an area of interest, and then other ones that are like more customized at the icons and maybe
Oh,
labels that they
that's
want to
so
have.
cool.
Yeah, and so we work with a bunch of companies in the outdoor space, and that was an introduction into the outdoor world for me. But yeah, I've always been fascinated with maps and cartography. It's just something even when I was a little kid, I was done with my work in school, I would be making maps in my
Mhm.
ranch, drawing stuff out. So it's something that I really love and I'm very passionate about.
Oh, that's all. Yeah, I was actually going to say this sounds like a very, very cool and like modern and 21st century version of cartography. That's so cool. I love that. I didn't realize it was beyond just ranches too, doing the vineyards and doing, hiking trails. That's so cool. How long what's the process usually like for that? I'm sure it depends on land size and just terrain, but what would you say is like the average time that it would take to truly map something out?
Yeah, it's a great question. A lot of times it's really the seasonal dependent. So like right now going into hunting season, a lot of people are like, "Hey, I want a map next week." And I'm like, "Well, we got about a 3 to 4 week turnaround." So
Gotcha.
we'll go out and get the best aerial imagery from there and then we work with a lot of different companies like Onyx or people might send us something from Google Earth where they have things already kind of mapped out on their property and they send it to us and then we'll go ahead and bring those icons those, points of interest on and we send it back a draft map and then there may be some back and forth. "Hey, could you change this border to this color?" or whatever it may be. Or we might show them two different images. "Hey, this one's leaf on, leaf off. Here's one that's in the middle of summer. Here's one that's in the dead of winter." Some properties are so overgrown, you kind of need to have that winter picture when you actually see some of the trails or the roads through the property. Otherwise, it's just, green canopy. And so, yeah, it's usually about a 3 to 4 week turnaround. And then, we print on multiple different types of papers and, products, laminated stuff. So you can use dry erase markers, whatever it is. And so, yeah, the name Map My Ranch, I know it kind of sounds like it's just ranch. And that's why we're going to be at some point soon here, going to be moving over to American made maps, which kind of expands it a little bit more. It's the same stuff we're doing, but it just, maybe not as pigeonholed as that because we really do stuff for people all around, the world, really. If anybody wants an aerial map, really high quality imagery, then, that's kind of what we do and we'll acquire that for them.
That's really, really cool. So where can somebody reach out to you to get a map made?
Thanks. Yeah, that's a good question. Mapmyranch.com is the best spot. And eventually we'll have AmericanMadeMaps.com. We own the domain. We just haven't really pushed that too much now, but everything is available at mapmyranch.com. We also have an Instagram page, but if you go to our website, I have a bunch of videos that shows us, a bunch of different kind of samples, different types of maps, what we can do. And that way you can kind of get a feel for if this is something for you. And, if it's like people who have lakes that they love to go on and they want to find out where there's bait or where they can get gas or where they can eat. We can have all those kinds of things too. And, if someone's fly fishermen, they want to go and even just camping, you want to have a nice little map of where you're going to go. So we can kind of do all that and you get a digital and then the printed, whatever kind of print quality you want.
Very cool. No, that sounds like something that I think people should check out because it sounds like it's an incredibly useful tool. That's awesome. Now, I do want to change gears again one more time. I see that in 2022, you launched your podcast with, it has the best podcast name in the world, by the way, Son of a Blitch, to retell stories with people that you've met throughout your life and your career. What was the inspiration for that?
It was really, I had a kind of a calling, and I think it related back to my work with Harvey.
Hmm.
And, he had he passed the torch because when towards the end of his life, when we'd have some projects and stuff together, a lot of times he'd kind of push me to lead where, he'd be like, okay, you do this, you have this interview, you write this article, and whatever it may be. And I had written a bunch of articles that had gained some traction in the outdoor space. And I just realized that the idea of interviewing people was something that I really wanted to get back into doing. And I decided that, I'd start a podcast, and it's something that, I didn't have any experience, doing that in itself, except for the fact that I had these interviews that I'd done before. So it felt familiar, but, I'd learned up on, what kind of software I need to get, what's the best type of equipment. And then I just kind of launched it and went from there. And I have a lot of friends that are in the music industry, so I reached out to a couple of musicians. The first one was a guy named KJ Saka, who's the drummer for the band Pendulum, and Destroyed. He's a huge, huge. The band is absolutely one of the biggest in the world. They play all the European festivals as headliners, and I reached out to him, and then I reached out to Leonard Peltier's lawyer, and then it kind of just snowballed from there. I've worked with a lot of the people from Meat Eater, who's really big in the outdoor space, huge company. And then I started working with a lot of authors. And, being an English major and reading books all the time and kind of dissecting those, that's something that I've always been a voracious reader and writer as well. But, those days of reading, whatever, 3 or 4 books sometimes in a week at Northeastern, it was, I got used to reading them quick and doing a turnaround report, right? And being an English major, it's kind of what you did. And so that was something that I realized I could take that and I could extend that into the interviews with them. So I worked with a lot of the, started reaching out to a lot of the publishing companies, Simon and Schuster being one that really trusted me. And so they started sending me a bunch of their, authors to work with. One of the first one there being Jim Shockey, who is a world famous hunter, probably one of the most well known in the last 30 years, and then Jack Carr, and then another gentleman who I interviewed named Brad Thor. And actually, he mentioned Northeastern in the story, and I was like, "Hey, that's so cool! You're one of your
Very
characters went
cool.
there." So
Oh
we
my
got to have
God.
a really good chat about that and stuff. And then I started doing live events. So when Jack Carr came to town, and he's the one who wrote The Terminalist, that's been produced into
I've
a
heard of that.
show on Amazon Prime with Chris
Mhm.
Pratt. Really amazing. And so he's a former Navy SEAL, and so I did like a live event there, and I've done some other ones with Don Bentley. And so when some of these authors come in and do their book tours, I'll go in there and, kind of MC the event for the most part. And kind of that's where I cut my teeth MCing events back in at Northeastern doing that. So it kind of felt full circle, and it was really neat to chat with Brad Thorne. I'm like, talking about Northeastern. I'm like, wow, it's, 360. Here I am. And so that's something that I really enjoyed, and doing a lot of work with veterans and doing whatever I can to give back to them, and kind of shine a spotlight on them, especially in regards to mental health
Mhm.
and transitioning out. So I worked with a lot of Green Berets, Navy SEALs, just different people who are, leaders and folks who have been very open and honest about their difficulties and laying it out on the line to help, other veterans who may be going through that, or anyone else who has mental health challenges. So that's something that, there's a lot of different avenues of interest in my life, and I've kind of drawn from each one of those. And this feels like a way that I can go ahead and honor these people, really share interesting people doing interesting things. That's kind of the byline of that. And it's really, I like that it doesn't have any boundaries. I can kind of
Yeah.
do whatever I want because I'm in control of it, and I'm the one who's setting these up. I'm reaching out to these agencies to work with them, or PR analysts, or national act bands, and reaching out to them. And as I've been doing more and more, I think it opens up more and more doors. And now people who may have been, a long shot, as far as 3 years ago. Now I feel like I could call them up, and, I just went and sent a message to Bill Gates today talking about his new book that's coming up. So like, I don't feel like anybody is off limits. I feel like now I've almost, 85 in, as far as episodes. I feel like I've got the learning curve out of the way, and I feel more confident about my ability to sit down with anybody and have those conversations. And it's a lot of work, leading up to this. And like, as you know, too, it's
Mhm.
anytime you're hosting a podcast, you're doing a lot of research and stuff, kind of getting ready to make sure that you're honoring them, their time. So just like you have, and thank you for that. I try to do that with my guests and try to be as diligent as possible to make sure that I maybe pull out something that they haven't talked about before, or something that is, it's new. It's not like a boilerplate thing they've done 100 times over. I want to make sure that they come away from that going, man, that was different. That was awesome. That was fresh. And that's something that I really strive to try to do with my interviews.
That's all. Yeah, well, I mean, as an interview guest, you're doing a great job. It's been so fun chatting with you. I really hope you get Bill Gates on. That would be so cool if you're
Oh,
able
I
to
think
do
it'd be a fun one. He's got a new one. I think it's called Source Code. Is his book coming out in February? But that's just anybody who's just interesting people, man. I just want
that.
to talk to them and figure out how their brains work. It's kind of like the Tim Ferrisses of the world who have gone out and worked with a bunch of world leaders and put out their snippets of things they've learned. I've gotten so many gems of wisdom and nuggets of just fascinating stories that at the very end of it all, I just feel very honored and blessed that
Yeah.
these people have spent their time with me, and that I can be able to kind of then be a conduit and share that out the world, because that's something that I just feel called to do. It's not something that's making millions of dollars. It's not like I'm not the Joe Rogan, right? But I'm sitting out here trying to just honor that craft, and really try to do the best I can to share people's stories that are, I think, fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. So where can somebody listen to the podcast?
Thanks for listening. I mean, thanks for asking. It's the Son of a Blitch. So if anywhere that you listen to podcasts, they also have a YouTube page. It's youtube.com/ at Son of a Blitch.
Mhm.
And then, yeah, so Son of a Blitch podcast. You can also, if you don't have Spotify or Apple Podcast, you don't want to subscribe to one of those, you can also just go to podcast.sonofablitch.com, and you can listen to it for free there. Also on my website, sonofablitch.com, I have a podcast page there too, and I list all those as well. And so I usually do the video. Not as many people listen to those. It's the audio is 100,000 times more listeners per episode. But the video, in case people want to see that, that's always there. And I usually take those video snippets and kind of upload little reels on Instagram or whatever it may
Mhm.
be. Like I just did a couple today with my most recent guest, Scott Mann. And so those are things that I'll try to, take little 2 or 3 or 4 minute sections that I find interesting and put those out and kind of as a promotional tool. But yeah, they're all available, anywhere that podcasts are available. That, Son of a Blitch podcast is there.
That's awesome. Yeah. So if you're listening to this right now, go check out George's podcast because it sounds like he talks to all walks of life, and that's the coolest thing in the world. Now, George, I really like to end the podcast with this question. And since this is the Northeastern Next podcast, I have to ask you, what's next for you?
I've got a book that I'm working on. There's a guy named Bob Lemons. He was born a slave, and in Texas, and in the mid 1800s, when he was 17, he was given his freedom, and he ended up working with a bunch of local ranchers, and he ended up becoming the most famous Mustanger of all time. And
Wow.
Bob would go with his Mustang, his stallion, and there's a place in Texas, they called it the Wild Horse Desert. It doesn't exist as such other than that little strip of land between the Nueces River and the Rio Grande. And basically there was thousands, tens and thousands of wild horses. And the, Bob Lemons would go out there with his stallion and live amongst the horses for sometimes weeks at a time, and then battle the main lead stallion of that wild, horse group, and then overtake the herd. And he would bring them back in to maybe where there was a ranch, and he would put a signal for them, and they'd open up two gates. And as soon as he was through the second gate, they'd shut it, and then, all the horses come through. So he was this wild, they called him the horse whisperer, right? The very first one. This guy was fascinating. And then when he in when barbed wire started going all across the state, and that open range kind of, got closed down and people were starting to get into ranching more and more, he and my great great grandfather were started to ranch together. And Bob Lemons, basically during the Great Depression, he loaned out money for all of the farmers who needed money, and he was basically the one who funded it all. He was, very wealthy from all his work of Mustanging. And then they decided, hey, we're not going to pay him back. And that's when my great grandfather would go around there and make sure that he would, collect and make sure Bob got his money. And our families worked together. We were super close, and continued to work together generationally over the years when they were ranching. and then Bob left us some of his property, and so we still have like an old chimney on our property of where he lived when his eyesight went bad. There's a 100 yards of like a guide steel rope that he'd walk
Oh, gotcha.
from there to my great grandparents' house to have, breakfast or dinner. And so he was family, and he just has a fascinating story. A lot of his artifacts of his life we still have within our family, and some of his family members have some. So the goal is to put together this book. My mother wrote her graduate dissertation on Bob Lemons, and we wrote down a bunch of stories. There's a bunch that are told throughout his family. So I'm going to put out that book, and hopefully, have a big event over at the Bob Bullock Museum, which is basically the historical Texas museum here, and maybe donate his rifle and some of his other belongings there as kind of a way for people can continue to learn about him. And so I don't know. There's an idea I have about maybe doing a screenplay with that too. So that's kind of in the what's coming up next. I kind of want to get to 100 podcast episodes, and then I plan to write like a little ebook or something about the experience of taking 3 years doing 100 podcasts. And that'll be kind of like episode 101 might be that one, as far as talking about how to go out there and meet with anybody you want, how to go ahead and reach out to people, how do you work with PR teams, how do you develop your skill set, what you can do to be a better speaker, or an interviewer, whatever it may be. I think that there's a lot that I've learned that I'd like to share with others that may, have interest in going down that same path too. So those are the two kind of bigger projects here in the next, 2025 calendar moving forward.
That's awesome. Wow, that's incredible stuff. It sounds like you have really great things and really big things coming up, and I'm definitely going to keep an eye out for the book because that sounds like a truly incredible. And I'm also just a sucker for like sort of, I guess almost niche history like that. That's not a story that isn't really going to necessarily be as mainstream as others. And that's really cool, especially just more, in a regional way. That's so
Sure.
cool. So I'm looking forward to, keeping my eye out for that. But, George, I wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today. This was like by far one of the coolest and most interesting episodes I've had. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And, I just want to give a shout out to Northeastern, the foundations of the things that I found interest in, all of the teachers, all the professors there, the community, my friends that I met there, the people that I worked with. I learned so much, and I feel like a lot of the skill sets that I had can be directly traced back to my time at Northeastern. There's so many wonderful things that I learned there, some great jobs that I got through the university, got to do tutoring. There's a lot of things that I really just I look back on, and I know that the beginning to a lot of those journeys started at Northeastern, and it was the best place you can go to college. So for anybody who's ever interested, look deep into Northeastern. It's a wonderful group. I'm proud to be an alumni, and I'm proud to join you on Northeastern Next and to be able to talk about my journey. Thank you so much, Thomas.
Yeah, thank you. All right.